Hello, everyone. So today we want to talk about lesson planning. As lead instructors or as instructors in general, when you prepare for a class, you need to be able to do adequate lesson planning for that course. So some things we will discuss during this presentation are what keeps the instructional process on track, the fact that lesson planning provides instructional information on how to teach, for more than just meeting the lesson objectives. It goes beyond that. It goes beyond what the textbook has for that objective. Oftentimes textbooks are general in nature and only provide minimal feedback for what you need to be teaching in that course, whereas the state and national tests actually go above and beyond what we discuss in the course. Guidance on use of instructional aids, basic of students assessment and how to assess our students. It also allows us all to be on the same page as instructors, since we do have multiple instructors teaching classes. So basically, a lesson plan does these things. It ties the objectives to the plan of instruction. So it ties those lesson plans, it ties the curriculum that you're teaching to whatever the objectives are for that particular lesson. It's a framework on how the materials should be presented for that particular lecture, because some lectures are different. Some will require more visual aids, some will require additional hands-on skills assessments and things like that. It also ensures that all the learning objectives for that particular class are being met. It also, addition to that, helps with time management. It allows you to appropriately distribute time and remain in each section for the adequate amount of time that is required to cover that particular subject matter that you're teaching for that day. It allows you the flexibility to also add to if you need to cover some additional material, or even take away if the additional material isn't needed. The lesson plan, it goes over the content, again, covered in the classroom, but it also goes well beyond that for the students. So again, like I said, it's a multi-purpose tool. It assists you as the instructor in preparing to teach that specific topic, so you know what to review prior to coming to class. It matches the declarative material with each objective, so it matches what you're covering that day with the objectives of that lesson. It also creates a systematic approach to assessing the students and their activities. It also provides me a means to assess you as the instructor to make sure you're staying on track with the lesson plans. It helps you to keep on schedule as an instructor, because we all know that as instructors, sometimes we can get caught up in a specific subject, especially if it's one that we are particularly take a liking to, and we can go a little beyond our time. It assists substitutes and those that are secondary instructors. So those that are secondary instructors need to know what's supposed to be covered. They need to know their responsibilities for that class. There's a consistency across all the board with everybody in the program, making sure that everybody is on the same page. Again, we have multiple instructors here, so having a lesson plan actually allows us to have consistency, especially on those flip-flop courses. It also makes sure that you as the instructor are adhering to those instructional goals and the standards for that particular topic. So let's talk about the ADDIE instructional model design. It's commonly used throughout the education environment. And what it does is it breaks it down into 5 different steps. So you wanted to do, the first step is with any learner, you want to analyze, determine the learner's needs, programs, resources, and overall goals and objective with this particular lesson that you're teaching. The design, you want to construct learning objectives, determine instructional methods, learning activities, and evaluation plans. Again, this goes beyond the PowerPoint lecture and the death by PowerPoint. we actually want to go well beyond that and make sure that we're meeting all learners' needs: the kinesthetic learner, the read-write learner, the auditory learner, and the visual learner. So we will make sure to incorporate all those objectives in our lesson plan. The thing is, we want to develop content. Development is important. When we're looking to do these classes, especially our paramedic program, we may need to develop additional materials that go beyond the normal scope of the paramedic program. A good example of this is going to be rapid sequence induction for the paramedic program. It is briefly covered in the paramedic textbook. However, we really need to develop lectures and simulation that goes well above and beyond that. Implements implementation. So conduct training online directly to the learners, or train the trainers. Sometimes our students can be the best resource we have when it comes to helping train other students. And this just shows you how the adding model is set up. So sources of lesson plans. Most commonly, the first place we go to is our book. However, we want to go above and beyond that. The State Office of EMS offers great resources that we can utilize to help with our lesson plan creating. The primary instructors or senior instructors who have experience in teaching can also assist when it comes to developing your lesson plans. Publishers, again, the publishers have objectives at the beginning of every chapter that we should be reviewing and looking over before we teach. National organizations, again, such as the National Education Standards are a great place to go. This provides objectives for each of the learning areas that we teach and allows us to cover more in depth. Institutions and agencies. Our partners, our institutions, our agencies that we work with are a great resource when we need to know specific things we need to cover, especially during continuing education and monthly CE courses. It's good to reach out to your local EMS system to see exactly what they need for that particular training session. The needs assessment. So let's look at what it looks like. So we want to know our intended audience. We know that our lesson plan for an EMT class is going to be different than that of a continuing education class or something we're doing as a monthly CE. So we need to look at our audience. What is their previous knowledge? Do they have a history in EMS? Do they not? Again, that's going to help us determine how in depth and what needs to be covered on those lesson plans. The student learning preference. Again, are they kinesthetic, auditory, visual, read, write? What is their learning preference? Oftentimes, when I was teaching in the classroom, I would have students take a learning test at the beginning of class just to see what their preferred method of learning is. Students are sometimes surprised that they think they're a kinesthetic learner when actually they fall more under the read, write, or auditory learning system. What's their academic background? Many of the students that we get have very little academic program or academic history. Some of them, on the other hand, have an extensive academic history, so they know what the workload is, and we know they have a good working knowledge of what to expect during the course. Any barriers that may hinder the learning process, it's always a good idea to make sure your classroom is set up in a manner to where the students are able to learn the best, and that's something we're going to cover in a later lecture. So again, some ways to obtain the information. Purchased from the vendor. For example, we purchase textbooks, we obtain PowerPoints and things like that. Asset tests from the local community college. So all of our students are required to have a certain amount of educational background before they enter into the program. For example, the advanced EMT and the paramedic are required to have a college level math and English, or be able to test at a college level math and English before entering the program. Students in the EMT program are required to be able to read and write at the EMT level, or correction, at the high school level, at the 12th grade level. So parts of the lesson plan. The front end of the lesson plan, this is where your administrative information is. So the administrative information is, what are we teaching today? What's the subject matter? What's the topic for the audience? Are there any specific institutional requirements that are required for this specific course? The audience description, who this class is designed for. Again, is it continuing education or is it an initial program? What's the goals of the lesson? What do you want your students to take away from this particular class? And again, we want to make sure that we list any cognitive or psychomotor objectives as well as affective domain. Again, another lecture that we'll cover in the future. Use action verbs to lecture to identify lecture or presentations that are important that they need to cover. Practical sessions. These are where they're going to demonstrate what they've learned during that process. And my suggestion is that anytime that you have a lecture, you need to follow it up with some type of practical lesson that brings it home and that helps to reiterate what they've learned during that class. Cognitive goals will be assessed in the summative evaluation. Again, we do psychomotor exams for every part of our programs. For example, EMT program, they do psychomotor exams on lifting, moving, vital sign assessment, things of that nature. AEMT paramedic do psychomotor skills on intubation, IV skills, and those things. So we need to make sure that we're assessing those psychomotor skills, and we do the checkoff sheets for those psychomotor skills. Affective domain is important to be assessed. So affective domain determines their ability to have compassion and treat patients as if they are an experienced provider and be able to communicate with those patients as a team lead. So again, the lesson objectives. List performance objectives that support the lesson goals. They should be categorized. Again, cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. Any equipment that you're going to need for that particular lesson. It's important to do this, especially if you have a secondary instructor who is teaching that day, because again, you want to make sure they have the equipment they need. Or if they do not have that equipment, you need to try to obtain it for them so that it's ready to go. The way a class should work is you should not be fumbling around during the class to find the supplies that you need. You need to arrive early enough to set up for that day and be prepared to keep these students engaged all day long. Remember that we should know the equipment that we are using. It's important to know what equipment we are using, how it works, and the appropriate way to utilize it. And know how to put in maintenance requests. Again, most maintenance requests will come through me. However, I can share the link if you need to put in a maintenance request, but it's important that you share these maintenance issues with me so that I'm able to correct them. Have a backup plan. As we all know, technology fails, equipment fails, so you should always have a backup plan when you are teaching. So recommended schedules. Make sure you identify the time frame. That includes your breaks. Remember, for every hour instruction, it's good to have at least a 10-minute break. Include practice activities. It's important to, again, make sure that you break the monotony. Do not just do all lecture. So it's really important to have those frequent, intermittent activities, which could be a Kahoot or it could be a game of some sort. There's many different ways where we can break up that monotony. So motivational activities. Motivational activities are great. Again, going back to the Kahoot, you can do role-playing videos. Videos are really good. YouTube actually provides you with a plethora of videos that you can make sure that you can utilize in your classes. Pre-test, we do a pre-test in every class every day. That material covers everything up to that point in class. The goal is to keep the students engaged and keep them learning. We could play dispatch tapes from other classes and have them interact and tell you their thoughts about it, maybe like what they expect to see when they arrive. Make sure that we're acknowledging HIPAA and we do not violate any HIPAA rules when we're doing this. One thing I do want to cover is when we do these activities, make sure they're not overstimulating the student. And by overstimulating, I mean that we're doing something that could potentially invoke them into having a feeling of despair or a feeling of anxiety because, something that's happened to them in the past. So be very careful with that. So body of the lesson plan. Purpose, awareness or mastery. So is this going to be a learning objective, or is this something that they're going to be mastering today? For example, the first part of a lecture would be awareness. So we're going to teach them about it. And most of your Con Ed classes are going to be awareness. So we're just reiterating and we're just teaching objectives. Mastery is when we're trying to teach a specific skill. For example, we're trying to teach intubation. So we're doing skill sessions on intubation, and our goal is for them to master it. So let's talk about the 6 levels of cognitive mastery. This is going to be the Bloom's taxonomy scale, which we evaluate every written test. So the first step into that is remembering. So test questions on what they remember about that specific thing. It's just basically the mundane things, the the wording and things like that. Understanding, being able to apply it to something. Those are, again, they're one step above. Analyzing, being able to take a question, analyze that question, and determine what the best means is. Evaluation, we want to evaluate what they're doing. We want to evaluate if they understand the whole process beyond the basic level. And then creating, taking it beyond that and being able to create a patient care plan and things of that nature. So we evaluate the Bloom's taxonomy in every test that we administer. Each one of those questions have a taxonomy scale that we utilize to test these students. So looking at the Bloom's taxonomy scale, make sure it's simple. Learners acquire new information or develop a new skill with feedback. So we want to make sure that we provide them with feedback. Fundamental. We want to make sure that they're able to analyze and able to take on those tasks of understanding what they're talking about. And then, of course, when we're looking at levels 4, 5, and 6 in the Bloom level of taxonomy, which is the last 3, they want to be able to move toward why those events occur, why they're doing what they do. One thing you can do is assign a level code, and a lot of your lesson plans do this. A lot of your books do this. Actually, put the taxonomy scale beside their objectives. On the back end, this is what puts the lesson plan together. It makes sure the students understand what you've covered, and it prepares the students for the next lesson. So again, you want to do a review of what you've covered, and you want to make sure you reiterate what you're covering the next lecture, what's going to be discussed, so they can read and prepare for it. So summary, again, reviewing provides a closure to that lesson, what you covered, reiterates those major objectives, assesses the assessment of their learning. What did they learn? Ask them questions, do some scenario-based stuff in the classroom. And then the next lesson, what's going to be covered, and any references that you may use. Remember, when you create a presentation, that you need to make sure that these lessons have some type of references associated with them, or it's considered plagiarism. So we want to make sure that we cite those in the APA format. If you do not know how to do that, please come to me. So specialized lesson plans. Again, online learning is a little different. So online learning, we want to make sure that we do lesson plans for those. We want to make sure that we're clear with the objectives of that plan, and we want to make sure we're identifying the intended outcomes. Simulation. With simulation, there's going to be a whole lecture dedicated to simulation. And what we want to do is, we want to treat those conditions. We want to make it as real life as possible. The time frame, we want to make sure we're strict on our time frames, because simulation can be very time consuming. We want to make sure that all of our equipment is ready to go when the simulation day starts. If simulation starts at 9, it's a good idea for you to be here at 8 o'clock in the morning to begin setting up for that simulation setting. When we grade the simulation, we grade it in the Sterling Credentials app for the paramedic and EMT, and that gives us our grading rubric. For the EMT, we utilize just our skills checkoff sheets. Make sure you're doing debriefing. Debriefing should be at least 10 to 15 minutes following the scenario. During the debrief, you want to cover what happened during the scenario. You want to review any mistakes and help that student leave there with a positive note. Lesson plans are fluid, which means they should be evaluated regularly. They should be reviewed. They should be taking into account any changes made that need to be made, make sure they get changed. And remember that it's a never-ending process. So, it's fluid. It can change every class. It can change every semester. It just depends on what the lesson plan is and what the objectives are. Or it depends on if that particular lesson plan is meeting your needs. And, you need to go and maybe do some tweaking for the next class. This is part of a strong educational process. Again, our goal is to provide students with consistency. Students should not leave a class feeling anxious about, or what are we going to cover about in the next class? They shouldn't be anxious about the fact, well, did the instructor miss anything that's important that I need to know for the state test or the national test? They need to leave there knowing that the instructor has covered every important aspect of that material. So troubleshooting. Remember that you must adapt and overcome. That's why we leave lesson plans a little bit of flexibility, which allows us to make those changes and adapt to situations where we may need to cover additional material, or we may need to go more in depth to material. Always be prepared to make changes. Again, technology fails. Things don't always go as planned, so always be prepared to make those changes. Final thoughts. Quality lesson planning is one of the many keys to making a student successful. Each of you know that when I go into a classroom, the first thing I tell them is our goal here at ECC is to make the student successful. And we will do everything in our power to make sure that our students are successful. Lesson planning, good quality lesson planning, is just one part of that process. I will share the lesson planning template with you guys as well. I hope that each of you enjoyed this. I hope you take something away from it. And if you ever need anything, please do not hesitate to reach out to me.